people who have had extremely distressing paranormal activity in their homes. What's your story? Hey everyone, the narrator from Culture Zone has to take a break for about a week, so I am stepping in as the guest narrator on this channel until he returns. This way we can still bring you stories in the meantime. Thanks for your understanding. And with that being said, let's get started. Story 1. This probably doesn't fall under extremely distressing, but I'll put my story down. The earliest memory I have is of an experience with an apparition, based on what I know was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. Parents didn't believe me and always had some explanation for me. We moved houses and tiny things would happen here and there. But once again, my parents always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. There was a full body apparition that both of my brother and I saw as it walked past a doorway while we were home alone. Fast forward to getting married and moving into an old apartment. Things start to heat up a little bit. Bins would get flipped over and the contents dumped on the floor. Things would slide off of the back of our vanity, about 18 inches deep, and fly 3 feet to hit the footboard of our bed, not gently. More activity than I had experienced before, but still not a lot. We moved into an almost brand new apartment, and while 1 or 2 things happened, things calmed down significantly. Then we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband would hear me calling him from another room. I wouldn't be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me all the way around the corner into the far room, only to dead end with the room empty. I came in from the chicken coop to him upset because I'd been calling him from all over the house. I'd been outside the whole time. It would make one of the dogs go absolutely feral, barking and snarling at nothing. I would have small, soft items thrown at me. I would hear clapping and walking around the house, and the dogs would go looking for what made the noise. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, absolutely losing it. A rabid dog. I can't get her to calm down. Usually a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her off this time. I finally go to my room to take a breather and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later, she's at it again. I can't describe how terrifying it is to see her like this. Like I said, absolutely feral. I go halfway up the stairs and I'm talking to her through the banister. Finally get her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs. And then a huge slam on the baby gate happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it because I've heard that's the best thing to do when something's right next to you. The dog barks, but I get her stopped again. Then, right in my line of sight, I see a pen slid forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack and goes into another fit, looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it, immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sit on my bed next to my cat napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later, my cat turns to look at the doorway. His back raises up, ears pinned back, and his hair stands on end looking straight at the doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. I have lots of other little stories though. Just moved into a brand new house and, knock on wood, nothing yet. Refuse to talk about paranormal activity allowed in any homestay, and I think subconsciously I pushed myself to only move into a new construction for fear of stirring anything in existing house up. With what I know about the experiences through my life compared with where I was staying, I've kind of begun to think I might be a poltergeist. A new construction home was the only place I felt safe moving into. So while my story isn't to the level of a horror movie, I'm happy to be out of old houses and apartments. Well, looks like we've got a ghost whisperer over here. You sure you're not secretly a member of the Ghostbusters team? All jokes aside, that sounds absolutely terrifying. I don't blame you for only wanting to move into a new construction. Who needs the added stress of potentially living with a ghost? I'm glad you've been able to find some peace and quiet in your new home, and I hope it stays that way. But if any spooky shenanigans do start up again, just remember to keep a proton pack handy. Story 2. I was 4 years old and used to sleep with my light dimmed and my bedroom door slightly ajar. I had begun waking up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and from my pillow, I could see through the open crack of the door into the dark landing outside. It started with me being able to see a dark figure pacing back and forth along the landing. Just a shadow really, but enough movement to tell. After a few nights of that, with me mostly just being confused but keeping quiet, I woke up and the shadow wasn't pacing anymore. It was standing where I could see it through the door crack, as if looking through the room at me. It weirded me out, but I wasn't really old enough to understand yet. Still, after a night or two of that, I asked my parents to shut my door when they went to bed. However, obviously that's not the end. So houses built in the 80s and 90s in the UK have tiny little windows above all the doors in the house. A night or two after having my door shut and thinking I was good, I vividly remember a hand pressed the top of the window from the outside. It got worse after that. I woke up in the complete dark one night. My light dimmer had a bad habit of slowly ticking down to dark. I wasn't completely freaked out still, but had a light bulb moment. Hide under my sheets. Perfect. So I did. I heard the floorboards outside my room creak as if something had walked over them, at which point, silhouetted by my tiny nightlight, a figure rose from the side of my bed. I had super thin sheets back then. I couldn't make out details, but it was big. Bigger than an adult I had thought at the time. And it started to breathe in deep, low, slow breaths. Then I felt something on my head. I reached up, and there, as if holding the top of my head, was a hand. Its skin very warm to the touch. I was still mostly confused at first and called out, "Dad? Mom? Brother?" No response. Then I felt fingers wrap around my ankles. My sheets never moved. The figure leaned down as if leaning its face into mine through the sheets, though I couldn't make out its features. But I knew it was looking at me. That's when the real Jed kicked in, a feeling I'd become familiar with forever. That cold, immobilizing fear of the unknown. I must have laid there with it for at least an hour, with it just holding me and standing there. No, and then leaning down to look at me before I fell asleep. I asked my parents about it, tried to tell them, didn't believe it, but they did buy me thicker sheets pretty soon after, and that's what became of every night. I'd wake up, hug the blankets around me as if trapping them with my head, hands, and feet kept me safe. Hear the creak of the floorboards and the breathing would start. It started adding more hand tools on my head, holding my wrists, holding my ankles, pressed to my back and stomach. And we'd stay there for an hour at least every night, me barely trying to make a noise or move. Stuck in that fucking terror. I still struggle to sleep in the dark or without something covering my head. I feel exposed at night, and I'm 32 now. Wow, that sounds like a really terrifying experience that you went through as a child. It's understandable that you still struggle with sleeping in the dark or without something covering your head, given what you went through. It's unfortunate your parents didn't believe you at the time. But it's good they eventually bought you thicker sheets to make you feel more secure. It's important to remember that you're not alone in having experienced something like this. Many people have reported similar experiences, and it can be helpful to talk to others who have gone through something similar. There are also professionals who specialize in helping people deal with traumatic experiences like this, if you feel like it's affecting your daily life. Story 3. My family and I used to live in a house, which we've thankfully moved out of, that was apparently a small school before the owners bought it and redid it. We were renting. My mom, sister, and I all heard our names being whispered in the passage by my mom's bedroom. My mom would often see a little child peeking around the corner at her, and the one day we had people over for a braai, and we were all in the kitchen. These people are heavily religious. Think small Africans, town Christians, and did not believe in anything paranormal. While we were all sitting around chatting, my sister's Bluetooth speaker that has a radio setting turned on out of nowhere with the volume completely up. The speaker was on the counter where we could all see it, and nobody was near the speaker. Then one of our kitchen cupboards opened and closed on its own. They didn't come back to our house for a long time after that. One night my stepdad had turned the heater off and then switched the plug off at the wall before he went to bed, but when he came through into the lounge the next morning, the heater was on again. He's the type of guy to just brush anything paranormal off and come up with a logical explanation for it, but he got extra spooked when he was running a bath one night and he had only the hot tap on. He left the bathroom for 2 seconds, and when he came back, the hot tap had been turned off and the cold tap was on. Finally, my weirdest experience there was when I was in the kitchen making food, and I turned my back to put something in the microwave. I heard like a little knock sound, and when I turned to look, one of our kitchen utensils that had previously been on a hook above the counter was sitting on the counter itself. My sister was at school, and my mom was in her bedroom on the opposite side of the house. I later befriended the owner's son, and he told us that the neighbors they had when they still lived in the house He was in grade 4, used to come over for braais all the time, and were generally very friendly with the family. He started having horrific nightmares and seeing things in his bedroom that caused him to move to his brother's room or his parents' room at night. Turns out the neighbors that came over all the time were Satanists. The family had a priest come and bless the house twice, and he stopped seeing things, but the nightmares never stopped, and he still gets them now in his early 20s. All my life, we've had weird experiences, like mirrors coming flying off the wall, hearing and seeing things, and just generally unexplainable occurrences. My best friend was waking up in the middle of the night thinking that my cousin, who I was staying with at the time, had come into my room and was standing by my bed looking at me. I asked him what he wanted, and when he didn't answer, I looked closer and realized that it wasn't my cousin. I ended up just saying, "Sorry, but I'm too tired for this, and I have an exam tomorrow," and I turned over and went back to sleep. Story 4. Many years ago, I had a Ford Escort I really loved. One day, I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie. Replaced. Soon, though, one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped, but the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different one missing. This keeps happening, and I assume all the threads are stripped a little bit. I didn't want to lose a wheel, though, so I get all new studs. Go through the pain of driving the old ones out. Way harder than I thought it would be. And get all new lugs to go with it. Before the week is out, I'm down one lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. I have a prankster. Feeling this is annoying, but no big deal. Very small town. I go sell some Blad plasma a few times and then buy a big old bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing and I keep replacing them. But then I notice one vanishes sometime after leaving for work and before I got home. Fallen off while driving? Weird. Coincidence? They're still occasionally vanishing overnight about once a week randomly. I start making marks in my owner's manual morning before I leave. When I arrive at work, when I leave for work, and when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally, one is loose. This fits the random falling off, but doesn't explain overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving. Sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart. Heart, spade, diamond, club, and it is definitely different ones vanishing, not always the same location. I can't explain it. Finally, I tried a dangerous experiment. I simply let it run with 3/4 lug nuts, cautiously at first, checking tension on the 3 remaining ones, because I imagined the wheel falling off at highway speeds. But over time, nothing happens. I kept the car almost 2 full years after that, and my back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires, and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished, though. I let things be, and it was always fine. Still no idea WTF that was. I don't know how disturbing it really was, but so odd. I'm now curious what would have happened if I had some kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. Story 5. This happened when I was 11 and visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside, considering we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick tour. As I played outside, a really beat-up ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up, I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse, looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him, and he wandered away. I didn't think about it, but when my parents were done with the tour, they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of, I was just wandering around. Oh, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid, he looked startled, because as I'd mentioned earlier, there was no one other than us at the lighthouse. Only 3 cars. My parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at the picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliche, but when he showed me the picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat-up ball. Apparently, that kid died at the lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy. So you might be asking me, why was this creepy? Especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me. What creeps me out is that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost pot or other object, assuming that was a ghost with his ball. What the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid, like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what touched it? This still bothers me to this day. Story 6. My childhood home was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 3. It started slowing with him and I seeing weird things at night and constant nightmares. Things would go missing only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps, and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years, it has started to escalate, and there are a lot of stories. So I have included a few. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running, and the door to their walk-in closet creaked shut. She assumed that it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the floor were swaying. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. I was home alone waiting for my boyfriend to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out of my bedroom and headed towards the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing. It almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It cracked its neck to look up at me, and I ran. I called my boyfriend, and he wasn't there yet. I hid in my room until he came. The last one I'll put is after my family moved out. We rented it for a while. The tenant complained of similar things that we experienced in our first few months there. He went out of town and left his dog in the garage. His friend came to check on it, and the dog was missing. He later found the dog, who was fine, just scared, locked in the crawl space that was completely separate from the garage and 2 closed doors away from where the dog was left. These crawl spaces were the worst place in the house for negative activity. Story 7. When my son was 3, he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up to see faces in the dark and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up and I would run into his room, and honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room, he was telling me about one of his experiences. I saw a streak of white light move up over his face. Another time, I ran into his room and he was up on his knees looking around the room. I didn't say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes, and finally, he looked at me and he said one word, Manya. It was apparently his name, for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time on the baby monitor, and we heard a loud male voice say, "Stop that." We happened to know a mother and daughter psychic team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside my son's bedroom. They tried cleansing the house remotely. They lived in another city. Our friends put together a whole team and they came and cleansed the house. It was quite a process, and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos. But they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. Story 8. I lived in a basement a few years ago. It started getting weird with noises in the kitchen, of plates shifting around at night and such. Then things on my desk would fall over, no matter how far from the edge I put them. All these small things you could possibly give an explanation to. Well, it's been years, and I still have no explanation for the following. This was Rome in August, so it was very warm. I was up on my phone until late, then I decided to set it down for sleep. And I perfectly remember the sudden sense of dread I felt, paired with a sensation of being super cold, out of nowhere. Weirded out, I sat down on the bed and got under the covers. And then I saw it, a big, gray, and electric blue cloud of smoke, moving above my head, floating in my room. And then through the wall. I was paralyzed by fear for a good 5 minutes. Then I went into my mother's room. To make matters creepier, my landlord, who lived above us, claimed that his house was haunted, without me mentioning my own experiences. and that he would see a naked woman running through his corridors. I was 16 years old. I wasn't high. It certainly wasn't a dream. It couldn't possibly be a light reflection of any kind, a trick of the eye, or actual smoke from somewhere. I'm not a religious person, and I would consider myself a skeptic, but I know what I saw. I think these are the kinds of things you can't believe in until you've experienced them. Story 9. I live on the second floor of a 2-story apartment built in 1912, which originally was a mansion for some of the wealthiest in my town. I've had multiple occurrences where I'd be home by myself and I'd hear whistling show tunes, usually only 2 notes or so. But they were so fucking clear, and I could never figure out where it was coming from. My mom often tells me the story of when she was asleep and dreamt of an older woman who seemed to be dressed in a more old-fashioned way, slowly walking into her room and sitting on her bed. When my mom woke up, she could still feel the pressure of someone sitting at the foot of her bed. When my mom sat up to go use the bathroom, she felt something slowly and gently push her back down onto her bed. Eventually, my mom was able to get up out of bed, but she could never figure out WTF happened. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.